You are standing in Nassau in 1698, and you are looking at something that should not exist. A functioning port city, a functioning government, a functioning economy, all of it built by pirates, all of it operating in the space between European colonial authority and the open ocean. This is Port Royal's successor. This is the Republic of Pirates, and it will last for exactly 40 years before disappearing so completely that historians are still arguing about how it actually ended. The greatest challenge the Pirate Republic ever faced was not the Royal Navy hunting them or the colonial governors trying to destroy them. The greatest challenge was that they had to build a functioning society from scratch using only the rules they created themselves. They had to organize hundreds of violent men into a cooperative structure. They had to establish trade without official currency. They had to maintain order without judges or police. They had to feed thousands of people on an island that could not feed itself. They had to do all of this while maintaining the fiction that they were not actually a government. This is the story of how pirates built a republic and how that republic simply evaporated. Nassau became the pirate capital around 1696, when the pirate crews realized that Port Royal in Jamaica was becoming too dangerous. The Royal Navy was increasing patrols. The colonial governor was executing pirates publicly. The merchant ships were becoming better armed and less profitable to attack. So the pirates moved to Nassau on New Providence Island in the Bahamas. Nassau was remote. Nassau had a good harbor. Nassau was far enough from the major colonial centers that the Royal Navy could not maintain constant patrols. And Nassau was mostly empty. There were no colonial officials. There was no government. There was no law. It was perfect. The first pirates arrived in small numbers. They were men who had been rejected from every other life. Some were deserters from naval vessels. Some were escaped indentured servants. Some were men who had committed crimes and were fleeing from justice. Some were simply men who wanted to live outside the structure of European civilization. They were English and Scottish and Irish and French and Dutch. They were from dozens of different nations, and they had no reason to cooperate with each other. But they did because they understood something fundamental. Cooperation was the only thing that would let them survive in Nassau. The pirate republic that developed was organized around a series of principles that were remarkably democratic for the era. When a pirate ship was formed, the crew elected the captain. The captain could be removed by vote if the crew decided he was not leading well. The crew also elected a quartermaster who was responsible for distributing plunder and mediating disputes. The quartermaster was answerable to the crew. The hierarchy was real, but it was conditional. Authority had to be earned. Authority had to be maintained. Authority could be taken away. In Nassau itself, a similar structure emerged. The pirates needed rules about how ships could be repaired. They needed rules about how food would be distributed. They needed rules about how plunder would be stored and divided. They needed rules about who could trade in the port and under what conditions. They created these rules not through any formal legal process, but through a series of agreements that evolved organically. Ship captains would meet and discuss what needed to be decided. Consensus would emerge. The rules would be followed because everyone understood that breaking them meant exile from the port and therefore economic death. The economy of Nassau was based on a simple principle. Plunder was currency. A pirate ship would capture a merchant vessel. The ship and its cargo would be brought to Nassau. Auctions would be held. Other pirates would bid for the goods using silver or gold seized from previous prizes. The merchant ships also carried letters of credit and bills of exchange that could be converted into currency. The pirates developed a system where goods and money circulated through the port at a rate that was actually more efficient than the official colonial economy. Food was the permanent crisis. Nassau could not feed its population from local agriculture. There was fish in the ocean, but fishing could not sustain thousands of people. Food had to be imported. This was done through a bahanitio, combination of legitimate trade and piracy. Pirates would capture merchant ships carrying food supplies. They would also trade with merchants from colonial ports who were willing to sell supplies in exchange for plunder at a discount. The pirates essentially created a black market economy where goods flowed into Nassau because the profit margins were high enough to offset the risk of trading with pirates. Shelter was constructed rapidly and pragmatically. The pirates took over existing colonial buildings and constructed new ones, using materials salvaged from captured ships. Wooden structures dominated the town. There was no stone architecture. There were no grand fortifications. Nassau was built to be functional, not impressive. It was built to house people and operations, not to advertise power. This pragmatism meant that the town could be expanded or contracted depending on how many pirates were present at any given time. The population of Nassau fluctuated wildly. At its peak, somewhere between 600 and 2,000 pirates lived in the port at any given time. But this number changed seasonally. In the summer, when the weather was good for sailing, the number would drop as ships went out on raids. In the winter, when the Atlantic was too dangerous, pirates would return to Nassau, and the population would swell. There was a floating population of perhaps another 1,000 enslaved and free Africans who worked as laborers and sailors. There were perhaps 200 women who lived in Nassau, some married to pirates, some enslaved, some working as traders and merchants. Medical care was a constant problem. Ships spent months at sea. Disease was endemic. Scurvy killed men slowly and visibly. Dysentery killed men rapidly and horrifically. Wounds became infected. There were no hospitals in Nassau in any formal sense. Pirates who were sick were treated by other sailors who had picked up medical knowledge through experience. The care was crude, but sometimes effective. A pirate who recovered from illness might live. A pirate who was severely wounded might be left in Nassau to recover while the ship left without him. A pirate who was dying was simply allowed to die. The Pirate Republic's greatest vulnerability was that it was entirely dependent on continued success in piracy. The economy worked because ships were being captured regularly and their goods were being sold in Nassau. The moment that piracy became unprofitable, the entire system would collapse. This moment came gradually between 1710 and 1720. The Royal Navy increased patrols, merchant ships were better armed, insurance companies increased prices, fewer ships were being captured. The profit margins that had made Nassau profitable were disappearing. The end of the Pirate Republic is where history becomes murky. Official records state that Governor Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau in 1718 and established royal authority. He promised pardons to any pirate who would surrender. Some pirates accepted the pardon, some fled to other ports, some were captured and executed. But the question of exactly what happened to the complex social and economic system that was Nassau is never clearly answered. Did the Pirate Republic simply dissolve when the economic incentives disappeared? Did it gradually fade as pirates died or retired or moved to other ports? Did it end suddenly when Rogers arrived with naval force? The truth is probably that it ended gradually and then suddenly. Some pirates surrendered, some fled, some were executed. By 1720, Nassau was no longer a pirate republic. It was a colonial port under royal control. The pirates who survived dispersed to other ports or retired with their accumulated wealth. The enslaved and free Africans who had worked in Nassau scattered or were absorbed into colonial economies. The women who had lived in Nassau either stayed and became inhabitants of a colonial port or left with their pirate partners for other locations. What disappeared completely was the institutional memory of how the Pirate Republic actually functioned. No pirate wrote down the rules. No pirate recorded the decisions that were made. No formal documents were created because everything was informal and based on consensus. When the Republic ended, all of that knowledge ended with it. Historians are left with fragmentary accounts from scattered individuals who remembered pieces of how it worked. But the complete picture of how hundreds of violent men actually governed themselves for 40 years and created a functioning society is lost. The legacy of the Pirate Republic is not that it proved democracy could work among violent men. The legacy is that it proved what humans will build when they have the freedom to build something new. The pirates of Nassau created a society without kings or judges or police. They created rules that worked because everyone agreed they were necessary. They created an economy that functioned without official currency or government sanction. And when that society was threatened, it simply dissolved back into the ocean from which it came, leaving almost no trace. What aspect of the pirate republic fascinates you most? How they actually governed themselves, how they maintained order without formal law, how the economy functioned without official currency, how women and enslaved people fit into the society. Tell me in the comments what you would like to explore deeper about this hidden history, and we will dive into the records of how pirates built something that should have been impossible.